I have a story about electronic arts that's mine. I lived it. I'm sure that if some of the other members of the founding team were up here giving a similar kind of speech, it would be completely different. Because it's all filtered after 35 years or 34 years through our own personal memories. But so you got to take it with a grain of salt. I think that this is what I remember and what I lived. But I imagine I could find some people that would contradict me. There were 6 of us when we started, and we were all called founders. By the time we became really successful, our CEO decided he was the only founder. So the rest of us were just early employees. But there are actually 6 that came together. It's sort of like there's a myth that Elon Musk started Tesla, but he didn't. He was an early investor and kind of took over Tesla, but he calls himself the founder now, and he wasn't really. But let me just go back and start with some background, because I think that one of the things that's kind of distinctive about Silicon Valley is the role that Stanford actually did play in it. And I think part of that is because there's some very early distinctions about how universities define themselves. Stanford in 1885 was established with a land grant from the Stanford family, but it defined the objective of the university was to qualify its students for personal success and direct usefulness in life. Now, I'll make a comparison with the excellent school across the bay, UC Berkeley, which is the top school in the United States that's public, but it was created by an act of the California legislature. And the university's design was to provide instruction and thorough and complete education in all departments. Now those 2 objectives lead to some very different outcomes. The fact that Stanford had as its main goal for the last 125 years to provide their students with, create or allow their students to become successful in their personal lives and have a useful and productive existence as a result of that. It includes a thorough education and instructions and all that, but it really causes a different way of focusing on what each day does, how you concentrate on things, and I think it produces a completely different outcome in the long run. And I think that's what's been really influential over the last 30, 40, the last 100 years in Silicon Valley. One of the other things is Berkeley, UC Berkeley is much bigger than Stanford, but also the selection criteria it's much more selective. As you can see here, UC Berkeley accepts 14.8%, 15% of all the people that apply. And Stanford is the most selective in the country at almost barely a 5% acceptance rate. And one of the things I'd like to say too is that I've noticed over the past few years that the group here at CDTM are in that 5% realm. It's only the students like you guys that get accepted in the United States at Harvard and MIT and Stanford for master's programs. I know people that have done that and are currently involved in it. And so even though I know that it's not politically correct to really talk about elitism here, this is really a very, very select group that you've got. And I think that makes a big difference in the outcomes as well. Now back to electronic arts, we were not a garage company ever. And that's the Hewlett-Packard garage on one side. But we had our first meeting at our CEO, Tripp's house in Portola Valley Ranch. It was a beautiful home in a very nice, exclusive neighborhood up in the hills behind Stanford. And we had dinner cooked by his housekeeper, I think her name was Edna. And we sat around, but we spent a whole evening with the 6 of us talking about kind of daydreaming, brainstorming about what kind of company we would want to be a part of. At the time I was with Atari. I was the only one in the group that came from a gaming company, even though I wasn't ever a gamer. And not any of us that met that first time and got to know each other. I knew two of them because we were all three business school classmates at Stanford, but we were not technical people, we were all marketing people. So at that first meeting in July of 1982, Tripp was our CEO. He had been at Apple after Stanford Business School, but he was a Harvard undergraduate and his major was strategy gaming. Rich Melman was a Berkeley undergraduate in physics. He also went to Stanford Business School. He was about 10 years older than the rest of us. And he had been the vice president of marketing for Visit Corp, which was the company that created VisitCalc, which was the first spreadsheet really on a home computer. And it was copied later on, of course, by Lotus and Excel. Bing was another Stanford Business School classmate of mine and Tripp's. And Bing went to Yale and was an English major, and he ended up in the advertising agencies in San Francisco after we graduated from business school. I was an anthropology undergraduate major at Stanford, and then went to the Stanford Business School. Dave Evans was the only sort of scientific guy. Well, I guess Rich was too with physics, but Dave was in engineering, but he was mechanical engineering, so he didn't know how to code games or anything like that. And then Pat married a woman. We had a woman in the first six. And you know, it's been so long I've forgotten where she went to school, but she was a marketing manager at Apple with Tripp. So Tripp joined Apple right out of business school, and he brought Dave and Pat with him from Apple. So Bing, Tripp, and I were all classmates, and Rich was, you know, he'd worked in PR firms in the Bay Area, so he was pretty well known too. But when we started, we didn't have anything except an idea. This was our first building. As you can see, it was not it was a Class A building. It's on Airport Boulevard. Still exists. By November of '82, we'd written a business plan, and it was a 100-page business plan. And Don Valentine was quoted as saying it was the best business plan he'd ever read. But we had no product, no traction. We couldn't produce products, but we promised our investors that we would be able to, we wanted to be a publisher of independent software games. We promised our investors we would have released at least six titles within 6 months after they gave us the funding. So they committed $5 million, and by November, a very short time. Those are not metrics that you could even hope to use these days, I don't think. But I think they based it, the investors, Brooke Byers was the guy at Kleiner Perkins who finally decided he would go ahead and take the whole investment, and then Don Valentine jumped on board, and Seven Rosen did too. And you know, it was based on the fact that they believed in us. So it was the people, it was really the people that they were investing in, not in what we had accomplished with startups before or any products that we had traction with. That's more common today, but at that time we didn't have that, and they still funded us. So then we moved into the second building, which was on Campus Drive, and by May, within our first 6 months, we had 7 products that we released. And some of them were okay, some of them were kind of copies. This Hard Hat Mac was like a, oh gosh, well, it was what's the name of that product where you kind of jump through? It's a yeah, exactly. Mario Brothers. That's right. So, but then a couple of these others, Mule and Archon, were like converted board games into digital situations, which was great. The pinball construction set was an excellent one, still is, because you could build your own pinball machine on the screen by dragging and dropping parts to a pinball machine. You could place it any place you wanted to, and then you could play your own pinball game, which was really kind of unusual at that time. But anyway, we started with those 7, and not one of them was a sports game, but you know, over the years, we got into trying to do sports simulations. We created a game with the help of Dr. J and Larry Bird. Both were famous basketball players at that time. And they came came to the company and gave us some advice and allowed us to use their statistics in creating the gameplay. And this is what we got out of it. So we started out with these stick figures playing sports, and we got famous people to help advise us and allow us to use their names in the products. And so over the years, we developed that to what I consider to be the quintessential example of what we wanted to form, what we wanted to produce when we first started the company, when we were first talking together. What we wanted to do was something like this. So as you can see, there's a big difference between stick figures and the characters now in sports simulations. But this is what we wanted to do in the early 80s, and it just took about 12 years at least to get to the point where the technology and the graphics and all of that was possible to put into position, to create this kind of animation and involvement. But and by the time we went after we went public, we built our own campus in the Bay Area. So we were always in Class A buildings, and I think that helped create somewhat of the part of the atmosphere around the company, or the culture in the company. And so one of the things I wanted to show you was stuff that we never made public. It was a video made in 1983 with some of our people involved in the company talking about how we wanted to have what our thoughts were about electronic arts and being a startup and kind of what we saw for the future. And what's interesting to me about it every time I see it is that it was created, these were concepts that we all believed in 1983, and it's fascinating to me to see that we kind of basically realized them all.
In order for us to do what we are trying to do, we have to be obsessed, and we have to be a little bit arrogant, and we have to be a little bit cocky about having a sense of possibilities that are open to us that aren't open to others because of our convictions. And if we didn't feel that way, if we didn't even have a little bit of a sense of not knowing what we don't know, and if we were too conscious of the pitfalls, if we were too conscious of the obstacles, we might lose our conviction. And we really do have a sense of really being obsessed with it and really believing that we know how to do it better than everybody else. And that may seem arrogant, but if we didn't feel that way, we wouldn't be able to pull it off. And it's because we feel that way that we're going to.
Okay, so that was Tripp, our CEO. And although it's not terribly eloquent, it does capture, even back then, and is valid today, the attitude that startup founders have about themselves, about their abilities, about their belief in themselves, about the understanding that they don't know what they don't know, and if they did, they probably wouldn't pursue their company, because it's always harder than you think it's going to be. It's never. We didn't have an easy time at all. We went up and down for the first 5 years of the existence. We had layoffs every year. We reorganized every year. We changed directions a couple of times, thinking we needed to get into productivity software for homes. That didn't work. We had to go back to games. So it's a struggle no matter what company you're in, and you've got to have that basic belief in yourself, and that you know how to do things better than anybody else. I saw, when I was executive director at Berkeley's Skydeck, starts from Berkeley companies, and all the founders there had that same mental attitude. And you see it all over the Bay Area. And so it's interesting to me that in 1983, that that was the the expression of a founder even then.
It's possible for a computer to provide a world where the rules are open-ended, where if you're flying around the planet and decide to take off toward that star, you can.
We can evoke in people a sense of, wonder, curiosity, intrigue, maybe a little smile for a grandson who learned how to do something on a grandfather's machine.
I'd like to write some software that interacts with you in a way that's really close to the way a person would interact with you. You may become attached to some of the software characters, and you may develop emotional feelings about some of the personalities in the software. That's why I've been mentioning the idea of a software friend. And that sort of should be built into a computer, but it can be built into a program too.
A lot of good designs just cause you to smile. When you look at it and you want to smile.
So this is a decade, more than a decade before the internet came about. And yet we were talking, I mean, all of us were thinking about being able to create an emotional attachment to a computer, because back in 1982, that was just barely starting to happen. Also, Bill Butch, who was talking there, was talking about creating a software friend. Well, there was no Siri, there was no real interaction at the time, but that was a concept that was present in all of our minds, and creating that emotional connection to a computer was paramount to us too.
We're at the start of things, and it's just settling down. How this business is really going to be run and organized is, I think Electronic Arts is going to be one of the leaders because of the professionalism of the people that are planning the organization and doing a lot of thinking about the structure of the artist relative to the producer inside the company, relative to the production and distribution aspects all being, integrated into one package. It's more or less where the thinking's got to be. It used to be just a guy in his garage can start selling. And that's still true today to some extent. But it doesn't go very far. And Budge could tell you, you can try that and you get your family involved in working on it. But in the end, you really need to understand how to market the product as well as develop it.
Okay, the point that I think Steve Wozniak made that I like to repeat is that yes, you can have a fantastic product, but if you don't have great marketing to go with it, you're going to be at a disadvantage. And that was one of the things that we were able to do, was to combine some fantastic marketing with some excellent products, but some ordinary games too. So I think that it goes back to the fact that a great team, a brilliant team, can make an ordinary product line superb and successful. A great product line with an ordinary team is not as likely to go anywhere.
Parents want products that have educational value, but products that their children are going to want to use. Kids that are interested in computing, they want products that are fantastically entertaining and exciting and compelling. And that's really the major part of the market.
We're focusing on younger people, and education is the most important thing in their lives. And entertainment is the most interesting thing, and it's usually divergent from education. All of a sudden with computers, we've got technology marrying the two together in a way that might be very productive.
Okay, so that's the only clip where we projected some ideas about edutainment, getting products, games to be able to teach people things, integrating with the education system that we were not able to ever achieve. The other stuff we did, but education piece, games and education just hadn't ever been a viable possibility, I think, until the iPad came along. And now I'm seeing in early learning, K to 6 schools, there's some around the world that are starting to use nothing but iPads for the curriculum and content and the mastery of skills and the learning process, which I think is great, because I think all the school systems in the United States and abroad are failing its students right now. They're not preparing them they're preparing them for our world, and I'm 66, and so my world's kind of past. They're not preparing students for the future world that they'll be facing in the next 15, 20 years. But Electronic Arts was not able to do anything with that. And so that's interesting to me that it was so impossible to do it. Now, I think one of the things that helped us was we built a company culture. And how did we do that? Well, until we had about 100 employees, every employee in the company interviewed every applicant for every job. And sometimes as we got to be 60, 70 people, it would take 4 weeks for an applicant to go through all the interviews of people in the company. And that produced two things. We had to finally stop that because it was just impossible. We got over 100 people to do it. But as we were building up to the 100 and something people, it made the applicants, after going through 4 weeks of interviews, feel like if they got a job offer at the end of that they must be the most fantastic person in the world to get through that many interviews and get a job offer. So they felt really good about themselves after that. And the employees who were interviewing these applicants, you know, every employee was given a little evaluation form to kind of fill out after and it was maybe a short interview, 15, 20 minutes. But it made them feel like when they interviewed for instance, in our second year we hired our VP of sales, a new VP of sales. Everybody in the company interviewed him. And they felt like they had a hand or a say or something in bringing people into the company. It made them feel more important. That guy we hired is now the chairman of the board of Electronic Arts. And of course, we had plenty of nerve battles. This is the culture. These would break out without warning, 2 or 3 times a week. They weren't really defined meetings or anything like that. You just sort of start shooting nerve balls at each other. That would transpire for about 10 minutes and then stop. You know, people go back to work. We also had Friday beer and wine meetings every Friday, where the executives were questioned by any employee. All the employees were forced to come to the meetings, and so any question they answered or asked, the executives had to answer. And Tripp was a big proponent of being transparent, so you had to be totally honest. We also did private screenings of movies that we thought were culturally important to us at the time. So we'd hire a theater and take the whole company on one morning to see a new release. Now what happens, of course, is that companies have corporate campuses, and they have theaters built on their campuses, so they can show their employees that kind of stuff anytime they want. But we did face all the hard stuff. So only one founder, Bing, stayed there for about 27 years. I was there the third longest after 7 years. Tripp was there for only 9 years. And within the first year, we terminated some of our original people. It was not hard. It was not easy to go through that whole process. The Rockstar Game Programmers, which we were intended to do, make our artists, turn our independent programmers into artists, it didn't really work, not in the long run anyway. They didn't have more than 1 or 2 original games in them. So we were having a hard time building our catalog. And as I said, we thought we would have to publish productivity. We finally had to become a distributor for other people's products, which we thought wasn't that good because we couldn't guarantee the quality that we thought we should. And the games got so much more complex that we had to bring development in-house. We couldn't depend on the individual independents to be able to do it on their own. And then the internet came in 1996. We didn't really have a good answer for the internet, or a good way to exploit it. It was, 14.4K baud modems or something like that early on. And Electronic Arts just really couldn't take care of that. And I don't think that they've really fully mastered the internet yet as a medium. So I've got five points. When you start a company, only select people you believe are the smartest and most talented people you can possibly find. Preferably smarter than you are. That's a major thing to think about when you're starting a company. And when you're starting a company, it's just as easy, or it's just as hard, to make a company that is world-changing and global and huge as it is to make a company that sort of works in your market alone. I mean, it's just as hard to do either one of those. So you might as well start out hoping and believing and trying to be as large as you can, to have the biggest impact as you can. Third thing is always be honest and true to yourself, even if it doesn't give you the advantage. And now the example I can give is that Larry Probst, who's our chairman of the board, used to be CEO, he had the opportunity to buy Grand Theft Auto and the company that made that, which would have added billions of dollars in the revenues to Electronic Arts and made it much more valuable. It's now about $5 billion a year, $20 billion about valuation. If they had bought Grand Theft Auto, or whoever makes it, forget the name, it would have added billions of dollars worth of value. And yet Larry walked away from that. He said, Grand Theft Auto is not the kind of product that Electronic Arts wants to have in its catalog. It doesn't fit with the image that we want to have as a company. The fourth thing is loads of money doesn't solve all your life problems at all. I can speak personally about that. It's, you think that if you get rich, you'll be able, all your problems get solved. They don't. It's just a fact. And fifth, it's important to give back. You are the most privileged people in the world to be able to start a company and see it through to its natural end, whether it's a long-term company or whether it doesn't last that long. But you're really, really lucky to be in an elite group that can do that kind of thing. And so it's incumbent on you to give back, to give your time, your advice, your help to other people to allow them to try to reach their goals too. And that's it. Thank you.